How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiegue, bring you guys all the latest sports news related to football in the footballing world with all the latest news, rumors involved with football. Today on March 7th, I got a great show for you guys planned out, starting with the latest comments from Deebo Samuel on the recent Super Bowl loss and just what he felt after and what he thought about how other people react to Super Bowl losses and what he thought around that on the Up and Adams show. Later on, I'll talk about a potential quarterback that could be making his way back to New England up to Massachusetts to join up with Gerard Mayo and all their new players and the new project that they're building up there. Stick around to find out who that is and what my thoughts are around that. In the second half of the show, we're going to be talking about the Philadelphia icon, Jason Kelce, on his latest retirement, and looking to the future. Where does this Eagles team go after not only losing their center, but one of the most important figures in that locker room? All before I wrap up the show in the last quarter with the last segment on all the questions that remain after the franchise tag deadline. A lot of things that puzzled me and a lot of things that still have to happen after the franchise tag deadline and that could affect the rest of free agency. All that and more coming up on today's show. And before I jump into the chip shot story of the show, the chip shot story, I want to remind you guys to, again, if you have any questions, please use the tip and donations link running across the ticker below me. It's a lot better for the show and a lot more fun for me when you guys engage in it, have any questions during the live show today. And if you do have any questions, use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. Again, if you can't see it, it's gsmcpodcast.net. It's a big help for this show as well as all the other shows across the network. And we always say a big thank you every time you guys are able to do that with any of your questions that pop up during the show. Saying that, it allows me to jump into the first segment. As always, the chip shot story, talking about Deebo Samuel, the number one receiver for the San Francisco 49ers. Hasn't been too active in social media, really commenting on anything so far during the offseason. But now he made a recent appearance on the Up and Adams show recently, just a few days ago, and he was asked about the Super Bowl loss, how he felt, now being almost a month, or a little bit over a month removed from that loss, and just his mindset of where he's at right now. Of course, there's a lot to think about with some moves that the San Francisco 49ers have to figure out, mostly regarding Brandon Ayuk and what players to re-sign, trying to transition now through a new defense under Nick Sorensen, now that Steve Wilks was gone. Still trying to continue that momentum, building on a solid season from Brock Purdy and going on and so forth. But what Deebo said on the Up and Adams show basically was that, in his words, he said, it's just so heartbreaking. The second time losing, this is the second time they lost the Super Bowl in the last 5 years. And he goes on to say he doesn't see or really understand how people always say, oh, there's always next year, we'll rebound. This stinks in the moment. Obviously, you lose arguably the biggest game of your life, but there's always next season. That's always the mantra of what people say. And he didn't really agree with it. He didn't understand how people just say that. In his words, he says, people just say there's always next year, but I heard that in 2019, and it took 4 more years to get where we're at. So it's not that easy as people think to get to the Super Bowl. It takes everything. And in that time period, those 5 years, the 49ers lost 2 straight NFC championships before making it back. So not only were they just not in the Super Bowl, they were just one step away from making the Super Bowl and getting back there, but they just fell short. The last time they were in the NFC Championship, other than this past season, Brock Purdy got hurt. That was just an anomaly of a game when you have 2 or 3 quarterbacks get hurt, and usually after the first one gets hurt, your chances drop dramatically. And just 2 more drop as well, then there's virtually no chance. And that game, again, it was a freak accident, but before that, they had another loss to I want to say it was to the Rams, I believe. I could be wrong. If my memory doesn't serve me right, it could be to the Rams just off the top of my head. But regardless of that, they were just within plays, within moments of making it back to Super Bowls. They weren't able to. And now, when you're at the big game, you're at just moments of achieving your greatest achievement in your career for some of these guys on the 49ers, or most of these guys on the 49ers, honestly. It's tough because you went toe-to-toe with the greatest quarterback in this last generation, probably of the last decade, in terms of talent, in Patrick Mahomes. He's up there, in the class of his own. Talks with Tom Brady, the only two that are almost on the same pedestal now. And it was all on, the controversial overtime rules, the 49ers not knowing it, and then all that stuff bundled up together. To still be that close, it's going to hurt for the 49ers and Deebo. You can see where he's coming from. And I just think he makes a lot of great points with what he's saying. How do we know this next season could be similar to this one past? Because, like I mentioned, they have a lot of questions on this team to answer. And just like other teams, they have to figure it out as the season goes along. No one heads into the season knowing how their defense is going to shape out. Hopefully no injuries. The amount of injuries always impact a team and a season, just how it all plays out. No one knows how quickly they're going to figure out who their most important players are, how to react to new coaches, what kind of scheme it all fits. Everyone has to figure that out. Everyone starts from the same spot. But with the 49ers, it's a little different because they've been there, they've tasted it, they've been within plays of achieving it all. But now it almost becomes redundant of you kind of know what to do, but there's always that new freshness. No team is ever the same. Every NFL player says it after the Super Bowl. No team from year to year is remotely the same in any sense, and they have to figure that out. And everyone expects the 49ers to be among the top teams in the NFC, as do I. But in the same breath, you start to think or maybe doubt a little bit in Kyle Shanahan, the players on the defensive side of the ball, perhaps. When those big moments arrive, we've seen it multiple times with Kyle Shanahan, especially against the Patriots, then in the Super Bowl that, again, against the Chiefs the first time, and now in this Super Bowl. It always seems to be at the start of the second half, the game plan just always seems to be the complete opposite of what everyone believes it should be, and he just takes the wrong decision at the wrong time for a good amount of the game that ends up costing him in the end. Now, you could always say no one play determines a whole Super Bowl because of how many plays, of how many things have to happen for a team to win and to lose. I understand that. But again, it's just those little patterns, those habits, I guess you could say, that you start to see with Kyle Shanahan that, after now, what is this, the third or fourth time going to be if they make another Super Bowl? What makes you so confident that it's not going to happen again? How much better can this team be for it to not happen again? You still expect Brock Purdy to be there, Deebo, Christian McCaffrey. They might get worse if they lose Brandon Ayuk. George Kittle will still be there. That O-line, for the most part, will all still be there together. But, if anything, they're going to get worse. Nobody expects them to get that much better. So what leads you to believe that if they do get back there again, that it'll be a different result? Now, personally, I hope that it is a different result if they do get back there again. I think this team is too talented to not win a Super Bowl or to make it again and just lose for the same mistakes that we have been seeing. And hopefully they get it correct. But I think this opens up a lot more room to think about, with all these changes coming and with all this uncertainty. I think this could be, just trailing off a little bit here, if you follow me, it would be a great opportunity for Brock Purdy to step in and really be that X factor that this team needs. Similarly to, I'm not saying he's the same player as Patrick Mahomes, but in a similar sense with Patrick Mahomes, where this past season he had to really step up and find this area where he could still be great and make the players around him great, even though they're not as great talents that he has had in the past. With Brock Purdy now, with all these questions around the team, if Ayuk's coming back, if they could make it back there and this time get over the hump, I think this builds a great opportunity for him to be that player that gets them over the hump, keeps performing at a great, consistent rate for this team. If he does it again for this season, there was always those talks about him being a game manager, not being a special talent, a special player that wins you games. All he had to do was not lose you games, was the narrative around Brock Purdy. And I think with this season, how it could turn out, it's a phenomenal opportunity for Brock Purdy to come in, be as consistent as he was last year, because he did put up very impressive numbers. If he could do that again, this opens up a lot more opportunity for him to showcase his talent and really establish himself in the NFC, because they already have the team around him, the supporting cast around him for the foreseeable future. If he can just elevate himself even more, I think it not only would benefit him, the rest of the team obviously, but people will start looking at him differently, and he could just build his resume that much more. And who knows, if he gets that much better and becomes that X factor for this team, he could win them a Super Bowl. And then, what's stopping him from building on that, getting back to the Super Bowl, and so on and so forth? You know where I'm going with this. That's just another thought I had. It always seems like when good teams, especially with good coaches, because Kyle Shanahan is a good coach, it always seems that when they are doubted, when there is a bunch of questions around them, if they find that one player that can elevate the rest of the team, it always ends up turning well for them. And I think Brock has the opportunity to do that. With the comments that Deebo Samuel also makes, it sounds like he's tired of losing in these games. He doesn't want to feel like this anymore, so they're going to be extra motivated to do so. And Brock Purdy could end up being the whole X factor that unlocks this. Just a thought I thought of as I was writing the notes for this, and when I saw those comments from Deebo Samuel, he's desperate to win one, and who better than Brock Purdy to step up and be that hero to take the 49ers to the promised land and win them their 6th Super Bowl. But those are all questions, hypotheticals, fun to talk about, but it will be fascinating to see how this team tries to continue that consistency heading into next season. But anyway, moving forward on with the show, I'm going to send it to a quick break, but on the other side of the break, I'll get into the New England quarterback situation and how a potential reunion with a former quarterback that was in Massachusetts a few years ago could be the key for the New England Patriots going forward, and why it makes the most sense compared to all the other options. Don't go away. You're not going to want to miss that segment on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world now.
Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network, we're going to talk about the New England Patriots and a potential reunion with Jacoby Brissett. The questions around Kirk Cousins, Baker Mayfield, Justin Fields, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, so on and so forth. All these quarterbacks, one of them has to be the right option, right? Wrong. It's going to be Jacoby Brissett, and I'll tell you why it's Jacoby Brissett. It makes the most sense to me, and it should make the most sense to a lot of people for a multitude of reasons. One of them being that he's already been there. He spent some time in New England. He was actually drafted there in the third round back in 2016. Then after that, he went on to the Colts, the Dolphins, the Browns, and last season with the Commanders. And last season was one where, he basically didn't play. He only played 3 games, threw 3 touchdowns, but other than that, it was just as a backup role to Sam Howell. And just there's been a lot of reports saying that New England is looking for a veteran quarterback to potentially support a rookie quarterback if they were to draft one. And according to Ben Volen of the Boston Globe, he reported that the Pats have a real interest in signing Jacoby Brissett this coming season. And now, other than the fact that he's already been there, he was drafted there, he's a seasoned veteran now. He's 31 years old currently. And what's fascinating about this whole situation with the New England Patriots and Gerard Mayo trying to start something new, a new story there in Massachusetts, there's already connections with Jacoby Brissett, even though this whole coaching staff is pretty new. The connection being that their new offensive coordinator for the Patriots, Alex Van Pelt, coached Jacoby Brissett during his time there in Cleveland in 2022. And other than Brissett starting his career with the Pats, if he were to come in, he already has that relationship with Alex Van Pelt on the Browns in 2022. And if you want to talk about his time in the past, in 2022 with Cleveland, he threw for over 2,500 yards, 12 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. It's not something to write home about. It's not something to get extremely excited if you're the Patriots to compete in that division realistically. But that was better than definitely than what they had this year with Mac Jones, Bailey Zappi. So in that aspect, already it seems an improvement. But just from my point of view in thinking, with Jacoby Brissett and Gerard Mayo, realistically, you don't know how it would all turn out. You don't know how well Gerard Mayo will deal with the day-to-day or the week-to-week in an NFL season with losses potentially piling up, how he'll respond to that, how he'll organize his teams, how his teams will be run. There's a lot of coaches on his coaching staff, which was something that was pointed out a few weeks ago, of how many actual coaches for individual sections of a team there are on his staff. But, he's a rookie head coach. He has been a player with the New England Patriots, but, you always have to see how it all plays out in real time, in live action with Gerard Mayo. And he could be great. I could admit that. He could be a great signing for them, the great next step for them and their team. But until we see it, you don't really know. And you've already seen it with Jacoby Brissett, at least maybe not in New England. He only had moments, instances, stretches of games where he came in and just took up the backup quarterback role in games where the starter got hurt. But he's already been there. He's already been with Bill Belichick. He knows how the media works, how the team works. Yeah, it's a new coach, and Gerard Mayo is going to bring in new stuff with him. But on top of that, he could bring that experience that he had there, and it won't be a totally new situation for a new quarterback to learn how to be a professional in the NFL or in a new organization. That's the step I think Jacoby Brissett has on other players. Just looking at Kirk Cousins, Baker Mayfield, Justin Fields, they've never been in the Patriots building as their quarterback. Brissett has. Now, those guys might have more talent than him, but what good is their talent if the rest of the talent around them isn't up to par? Are they really going to perform that much better? And an older Kirk Cousins coming off of a ruptured Achilles, a Justin Fields that might have his confidence shaken a little bit, or you don't really know what his potential is after all that time almost wasted in Chicago with Baker Mayfield. Was the last year an anomaly, or is he actually going to turn the page and be a consistent quarterback? All these quarterbacks, along with Jacoby Brissett, have questions that follow them, but the thing that separates Jacoby Brissett is that he'll come at a cheaper price. With Kirk Cousins, it's been reported that him and the Vikings are close in negotiations, but the thing that's holding it up is the guaranteed money. Are the Patriots willing to pay that guaranteed money that much more for, like I mentioned, Kirk Cousins that's in his mid-30s now, coming off of a really bad injury? Are they willing to pay Baker Mayfield a lot of money potentially, depending on how much he wants, for the uncertainty around him as well? And Justin Fields as well, he's coming up on a fifth-year option that's going to pay north of $20 million if they pick it up. Is that another decision that they're willing to take? With Jacoby Brissett, I know the talent might not be there. I'll give up that point. But on the other hand, he'll come cheaper, and the result will essentially be the same. I don't think the Patriots are coming into this season thinking that they're going to compete for this division, let alone the whole conference. They might be picking in the top 10 again next season. We still have to find out, obviously, with the games, but that's just a thought I'm having. And compared with other quarterbacks just around the league, you look at Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell, they finished as the starters on their team, and I don't think Jacoby Brissett is that much worse than a Gardner Minshew or an Aiden O'Connell especially. He's had his experience in the league in New England. He's been in all these different organizations to kind of test out, get a piece of how to operate in different organizations under different coaches. Now he'd be returning to a former coach in Alex Van Pelt in a building he already knows pretty well, that he was drafted there. So I think in comparison, wrapping that all up, it's almost a no-brainer for Jacoby to come back there and play there, at least as a backup, because this all started with the report of the Patriots potentially drafting a quarterback anyway at number 3. I still have the mindset that they should trade back and try to stock up the picks, because this team is still lacking a lot of talent. They have a lot of important free agents on the market right now, and it's almost a guarantee that all of them won't be coming back. You're going to lose some pieces, so you're going to need more draft capital to rebuild the entire roster to be as competitive as you can this next season. So what do you have to lose if you still follow your plan, you still draft a quarterback at 3, and you just sign Jacoby Brissett to a year or 2-year veteran minimum that won't cost you a lot? It'll be cheaper than the other options like I mentioned, and on top of that, Jacoby Brissett has already learned that Patriot way with Bill Belichick and his coaching and all his expertise that he could bring to a Drake May, a J.J. McCarthy, a Jaden Daniels, whoever they draft at 3, if they go that route, he could bring all that expertise and lay out the foundation of what it means to be a New England Patriot, the responsibility of it. And they're both going to be entering a new situation with Gerard Mayo. It might not be the same Patriot way, but I still believe the foundations of it, the coaching and everything, what to expect out of New England will be. And who better to teach that to a young guy than Jacoby Brissett, who's already learned it under the master of the Patriot way, arguably the best coach of all time in Bill Belichick. And just all of that, it does make sense for Jacoby Brissett. Now, if you want to say, why bring in Jacoby Brissett if you could just stay with Mac Jones, Bailey Zappi potentially? They're still under contract with them. And, that's an idea. It's definitely an option for them to do that if they're going to go with the lowest risk option of keeping all their chips aligned and just accepting that this year's not going to be their best season and just planning for really the following year, why not just stay with Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi? The reason I would give for that is you saw how bad it was this past season, and I think with all these changes that you're making, getting rid of Bill Belichick, there's a lot of free agents on the market, like I mentioned. I think they're really trying, Robert Kraft is really trying to reset everything, get rid of everything that was bad, that was questionable last season, and really just turn the page and try and forget everything of last season. If you stick with Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi, yeah, it might be around the same skill level of a Jacoby Brissett. You can argue that. But on top of that, I just think they carry a lot of extra baggage, that a lot of negativity from the fans, from people perhaps in the organization that feel that they should already be gone from the team. They don't belong on the team anymore. Their play hasn't supported them earning a roster spot on this team. That is a different discussion if they deserve to be on the team or not. But just to argue against the point that, why not keep them? It's simply for the reason that they just carry a lot of extra bad media attention that you don't want around a Gerard Mayo-led team that is already going to have a lot of pressure on him to perform. And once things start to look a little bit rocky, he doesn't need other people bringing up why he kept Mac Jones. It was obvious that they should have got rid of him. I don't know why he's still on the team. He doesn't need all that extra stuff. And rather than carrying that on him as a low-risk option, I think the next best option for the team to rebuild is to get Jacoby Brissett, bring him in, accept the bumps in the road, but at least you're not trying to make something that didn't work, trying to test it out in a new season and forcing it to work with Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi. I think both of them have kind of run their course in New England, and with the high standards that all the New England Patriots have become accustomed to, just that city in general, in Boston, with all the success that not only their football teams have, that their basketball teams have, all their sports teams, the Red Sox, the Bruins, and everything, to not have the level of success, there's a lot of standards there to hold up to with the team and amongst the fans. I think they have to change something, and just as a sports fan of itself, I think it's a lot better to see the team trying to change something with the quarterback. Even if it might not work out, it always ends up being better. The fans always end up feeling better than you keeping the same quarterback around, forcing it, trying it to work. If the fans see change, see you trying to make something different of this team, they will appreciate that, even if it doesn't work, and they won't be clamoring for your name to be out the door sooner rather than later. They'll give you another chance potentially if they do see some positivity coming of that change, because a lot of people, quite frankly, new coaches, don't try to make drastic changes, try to stick around the quarterbacks, and they might try to take as least amount of risk as possible and just try and get by. This is similar, but you are trying to make a change, trying to change the identity of this team with a new quarterback, maybe drafting one as well and planning for the future. Or you can trade it, improve the rest of the team elsewhere, and then next year try and make another move in free agency or drafting a quarterback potentially in that draft to try and help you out in a different way. But wrapping that all together, putting a bow on it right now, Jacoby Brissett seems like the best option for me for this franchise to just move forward and try to start a new chapter. We're going to see where it goes. It's an interesting topic. As the new league year gets closer and closer, they'll definitely be one of the teams that will be active in free agency because they have a lot of cap space, but they also have a lot of free agents to figure out. But as they try to figure out their situation, we're going to put a pin in that, and we're going to move on with the show and with the next segment, that being Jason Kelce. Everyone saw his retirement speech. Everyone has sent him all the messages of him wishing him the best and the rest of what he does with his life post-football. But we're going to talk about what the Eagles plan to do post-Jason Kelce and what they should do, what are their options to do in the offseason to try and establish that offensive line, keep it stable, and still have success going forward. All that plus the questions that still remain after the franchise tag deadline in the NFL. All that is coming up on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Don't go anywhere. You're not going to want to miss those.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Coming back here now to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. On to the third segment on Jason Kelce, the longtime Eagles center, and how the Eagles plan to move on from him. An interesting segment with a lot of options to talk about. But before I get into that, for one more time in this show, I want to remind you guys to please use the tip and donations link with any questions that you may have that may pop into your head while watching the show on any of the topics that I've talked about already. If you can't see the tip and donations link, it's gsmcpodcast.net. This just ensures that your question gets put to the top of the line on this right-hand side of me in the chat box. I'm able to see it, read the question on air, as well as interact with you guys and any thoughts that you may have. It's greatly appreciated every time you guys use this with any questions, comments during the show. It's a big help for the show. And like I said, we greatly appreciate it every time anyone's able to do that. Now, back to Jason Kelce. The Philadelphia Eagles lost one of their more impactful players just a few days ago on Monday. Jason Kelce called it quits on a 13-year career. A very emotional press conference that he held there with all his family there in the Eagles facility. He gave a great speech there, and now the Eagles have to accept this reality of moving forward with one of their more beloved players and people that have come through Philadelphia sports. And this is a big hurdle for the Philadelphia Eagles just because they also have a lot of other things to work out and think about in terms of, personnel, their coaching staff figuring out how to fix that, because last year we saw that transition from Jonathan Gannon and Sean Steichen, them leaving, and then Brian Johnson coming in, and the transition from that wasn't as smooth as they would have hoped. There was a lot of turmoil around that, around Sirianni as well, and not to mention some of the players that they still have to figure out as well. There's trade rumors around Hassan Reddick. There's been reports that they have allowed him to seek a trade for himself on another team. There's talks about, that secondary, trying to improve that. They don't really have an established safety that's up to the level of what they used to have. Reed Blankenship is there. He's a solid player. I like him, but they definitely need more than just him there. There's rumors around C.J. Gardner-Johnson coming back, but they have to figure all that out. Their linebackers are not the best. And along their defensive line, they have Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham that are free agents. They're much older, so it might be harder to work out a deal for them to come back if they want them back. But they're also 2 and 3 on the top 3 locker room guys that the Eagles had last season. They just lost one officially in Jason Kelce. Can they afford to lose the other 2? And, try and deal with the leadership aspect of the Eagles locker room, because that's a big thing, obviously, in the NFL. And you could rest assured that if there are problems, if there are turmoils on the sidelines, the leadership will be one of the first things brought up for this Eagles team. But sticking with Kelce and really honing in on what they can do to replace him, they're fortunate in the sense that they still have Jordan Mailata, Dickerson at the guard position as well. He's a great pick that they had in the draft a few years ago in the second round. And Lane Johnson, a surefire Hall of Famer as the right tackle. So now they have to figure out the center and right guard or left guard, depending where Dickerson goes. And I think one of the most sound and reasonable expected replacements for Jason Kelce could be Cam Jurgens, already on the team. Played right guard last year because obviously Jason Kelce was still there. But he was drafted by the Eagles in the second round just in 2022 out of Nebraska. And he was considered to be one of the best centers in that draft. But the Eagles took him regardless. He played right guard last year because Isaac Seumalo moved on to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Cam Jurgens stepped in a different position on the O-line, not his natural position, but he did solid enough for them to have a decent record overall last season. But now, all the reports, all the indications show that he would naturally slide to his more comfortable position on that offensive line. Now, it seems easy, a simple transition, but how is it going to look for Cam Jurgens? You know, the O-line might seem similar, all the positions might seem similar, but it's definitely a very big difference along the left side of the offensive line if you play there, on the right side if you play center, guard. It's all very different in it. Each of them have their own little quirks and little things that you have to get used to, habits that players build up. Just sensory, touching the person to your left or to the right, being surrounded with all the blocking assignments and stuff like that. He's lucky that he's done that already for the majority of his life, but he hasn't done it for 2 seasons now with Kelce being there. And you could say that he's practiced there. It's not the same thing. Once you do it in a real game, that real pass rush, that pressure that gets put on you by the defensive lineman, it's going to feel relatively new for Cam Jurgens, snapping the ball and then getting ready to block. But it could be a smooth transition because he's already done it, like I mentioned. But on the other hand, he has also had a decent amount of injuries as well. He didn't play his rookie season at all. And last year, like I mentioned, he was at right guard. He started 11 games, but he also dealt with injuries on top of that. So, you know, staying healthy, being out there on the field is huge to build that repetition with Jalen Hurts and with the rest of the offensive line, because at times, if you're an established center, if you're really commanding that offensive line, you have to pick out blitz packages, assign the blocking assignments to everyone, know where the blitz are coming from, and help the quarterback in that aspect. And, you know, it's all going to be new for Cam Jurgens. There's definitely going to be hiccups along the road, but he seems like the more likely option right now. And on the other hand, if you want to look elsewhere, free agency potentially for the Eagles, they're lucky that this free agent market is shaping up to be one of the more talented and just top-heavy classes that I've seen in recent memory, just following football and knowing it. There's a lot of options outside of them. You could go from Dalton Risner from the Vikings. He's only 28 years old. Nick Allegretti, who played in the Super Bowl for the Kansas City Chiefs, who stepped in there. He was mostly a backup, but he did very well in the Super Bowl. Evan Brown from the Seattle Seahawks, a free agent for the Eagles that they could re-sign and try out at one of the guard positions in Iusoa Opeta or Jack Driscoll, both young guys at 27 years old. You could try them out at the guard position and see how that goes. But if not, there are other guards out there that are still very well established and very talented and even very young in some cases, like Cody Ford from the Cincinnati Bengals. He's only 27 years old. I had Kevin Dotson on this sheet, but just before the show, just minutes before the show, he signed an extension with the Los Angeles Rams to go back there. So he's not an option anymore, clearly. But there's always John Runyon from the Green Bay Packers. He's 26 years old. And Mike Onwenu from the New England Patriots, who had to be released because they placed the tag on Kyle Duggar. So Onwenu was going to be a free agent, and he hits the market now. And some of these younger guys that are, you know, still in their mid-20s-ish, a John Runyon, a Dalton Risner, a Cody Ford, might cost a little bit more, but you still definitely have cheaper options like Allegretti, as I mentioned, and Evan Brown, or you re-sign some of the guys that you've already had in the building, in the offensive line room, in Opita or Jack Driscoll. All those kind of are the safer option if you want to look elsewhere to improve the rest of your team. They already had to make some free agency cuts in Avonte Maddox to get under that salary cap. They might not be able to keep Hassan Reddick because those reports, like I mentioned earlier, say that they've allowed him to seek a trade. But on top of that, it was reported that he could be seeking a bit more money. So obviously that's not going to work with Philadelphia. So they're going to have to get over that. And just going off the field a little bit here for the Eagles and trying to replace them, they're at an interesting spot where, just in their division, in terms of big picture, projecting past Jason Kelce and where this team could end up. I mentioned the leadership thing before and who's going to step up if Fletcher Cox, who's rumored to be seriously considering retirement, and if they don't bring Brandon Graham back, who's first going to be the leader of that team? And once you do establish those leaders, how are they going to deal with it and add extra pressure from it? And as well, this is a pretty crucial season for Jalen Hurts in the sense that not only does he have to now figure out that new relationship with a new center, that communication, that exchange with a new center. A big part of their offense was the tush push, and that exchange between Jalen Hurts and Jason Kelce might not seem important at all to some people with how fast the play goes down and how quickly they just get the first down. But that also comes with experience that Jason Kelce has of being a veteran, knowing all the tricks and everything like that. Is Cam Jurgens going to be able to execute that to the same level? And if he can't, how different are they going to look without having that tool in their back pocket to pull out every time they need a crucial down to get? That's one thing. But going back to the Jalen Hurts thing, more on him, this could be a big year for him just because he's not coming off a very impressive year last year. And there was a lot of turnovers, a lot of interceptions, a lot of indecisiveness, it seemed, in his throws. You could put that on the offensive coordinator, Brian Johnson, and all the turmoil that they had there. But in the same breath, he showed great talent 2 years prior or a year prior to last season. And to see that drop off, it might scare a few people, might bring up a lot more questions on Jalen Hurts. So I think this year it's gotten a little bit harder for Jalen Hurts, but he's going to have to still go out there and not prove himself, because I think he's proven it already going toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. But he's just kind of has to remind everyone that, he's a great quarterback, great talent. You can question his arm, but as an athlete, as a good athlete at that position, I think he's among the top 7 to 5 most dangerous players at the quarterback position. I didn't say top 5 throwers of the position, because, you could argue a bunch of other quarterbacks that could throw it better than him. But in terms of scaring the defense, intimidating the defense, and keeping the defense on their toes, I don't think you get much better than Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, and Jalen Hurts in that conversation because of what else they could bring, the creativity that they can bring, and the danger that they bring with their legs, that it keeps defenses guessing. They don't know who has the ball, if they're going to throw it, and if they do run it, they're huge. Jalen Hurts is a huge guy like Josh Allen. It's not going to take 1 or 2 players to bring him down. All of that is wrapped up in a good, talented player that Jalen Hurts is. But this year is going to be crucial to get over that hurdle and get this Eagles offense back to humming like they were that season that they made it to the Super Bowl. They have a lot of things to figure out, but I am pretty confident in the Eagles to figure it out. Really in an NFC that's not too top-heavy, and I'm sure they'll make the playoffs, but it's how they perform in there. After an ugly loss last season to the Bucs, how they come back from that and get everyone involved and look like the team that I believe they can be. But anyways, I'll leave it at that with that segment. and we'll be moving on to the last segment of the show. Not before I go to a quick break here, the last break of the show, and on the other side of it, I'll bring you all the questions that still remain after the franchise tag deadline. What the heck are the Giants doing? How long before one of these running backs are signed? And which quarterback move is going to cause the biggest ripple in free agency? All that, my thoughts on it, coming up next. Thank you for joining me on this last segment of the show. And heading into the last segment of the show, the last topic I wanted to bring up is the questions, potentially more questions after the franchise tag deadline. That deadline was on Tuesday, and we saw a lot of players get franchise tagged. Josh Allen, Brian Burns, Antoine Winfield, Justin Madubuike, all these players that these teams couldn't really afford to get out the door, even get a sniff of free agency or other teams that might pull them away. So they were tagged, and these teams now have more time with them to negotiate a long-term deal. And for the most part, the majority of those deals seem to be trending in the right direction. One of those deals actually got finalized before I started this show today. Jalen Johnson was one of those players that was signed to a franchise tag and then worked out a long-term deal. I think it was 4 years, $76 million. I know it was 4 years. I just can't remember off the top of my head if it was 76 or 86 million per year. But he got a big deal. The Bears made it a priority to not let him get away. And now he's locked in for at least 4 more years, potentially 2 more years on a clause that I saw in his contract. But regardless of that, we get to the period after the franchise tag deadline. And there's still questions that I certainly have about some of these things that happened. One of the biggest ones is around the New York Giants. I have to start with this one because the franchise tag is put in there to make sure your best players aren't getting away. As simple as that, in layman's terms, to just keep your best players at least longer for you to negotiate a long-term deal. And the Giants didn't do that at all without them tagging Saquon Barkley or Xavier McKinney. Arguably, their most reliable player, in my opinion, was Xavier McKinney because of his durability. He was the best player certainly on that defense, and the value that they got for him in the second round, picking him in 2020, he made 46 starts in 49 appearances for the Giants. Just this last season, he had 116 tackles, 11 pass defenses, and 3 interceptions. And the biggest thing for me, he was on the field for every defensive snap for the Giants in 2013. And it was already reported that the Giants weren't going to tag Saquon. They still had hopes that they could get a long-term deal done, but that obviously didn't happen. He's rumored heavily to go to the Houston Texans. And what other player did they have to tag that was as significant as Xavier McKinney? There wasn't one. And based off of all those stats I just laid out there, how consistent he's been growing into that leader of that defense, a capstone or a pillar, I should say, for that defense. I just don't understand how they couldn't tag him. And now he gets added to a very impressive safety market in free agency with Antoine Winfield now being off of it, you could argue that Xavier McKinney is at least the second best safety available other than Justin Simmons now. Justin Simmons is more likely to come at a higher price, so Xavier McKinney might be the more appealing one to a lot of teams, and for the Giants to just not apply the tag to him, yeah, they could say they're confident in applying or working out a long-term deal in free agency. Realistically, if you're Xavier McKinney and you really lay out your options, and it's more likely that another team that's in a better situation than the Giants comes knocking at his door. If they're offering the same amount of money or more than the Giants, I don't think it'd be a hard decision for Xavier McKinney to move on for his career because of the questions that the Giants have around the quarterback. They don't really have a receiver. Their old line isn't really that great. They're going to lose Saquon Barkley, and defensively, they don't really have any stars. They have Kayvon Thibodeau, who's a good player. I really like him, but he's still not established enough to carry all the weight of that organization. And if things go wrong, are Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen going to be there? It doesn't seem like the Giants were really thinking, I don't know, I guess long-term that much. And if they sign him after to a long-term deal, that's great for them, but I just don't see it as a big possibility for them to do it. If I was Xavier McKinney and I was thinking about myself personally, career-wise, that's kind of where my head would be at. And we'll see how it plays out, but that was the biggest question that I couldn't really wrap my head around. And moving on to that, talking about the franchise tag, another question I just had was what was going on with all the franchise tag placements and then trades. I think that's a bigger topic that I've seen pop up a lot more this year than I've seen in the past. Usually when players get the franchise tag, it's they'll play it one more year and then another team will get their hands on them. But I think this year I've seen a lot of players be just placed on that franchise tag with the intention of trading them later, and almost teams accepting the fact that they're not going to get something done, even with more money integrated into the whole league this year with the $255 million as the cap number. To see all these sign and trade deals, it's kind of mind-boggling. Just as examples, L'Jarius Sneed, T. Higgins, and Brian Burns. Now, they're not guarantees to be traded. They all got franchise tagged, but there's a lot of reliable sources out there that believe that the Chiefs are on the verge of signing Chris Jones, and all the money that they're going to have for Chris Jones, there's not going to be enough for L'Jarius Sneed. They told him that they'll franchise tag him if it comes down to it, but if they can't work out a long deal, they worked out with him that they'll be looking for trade options, to still benefit him and make sure he can get his money elsewhere if it comes down to it. And with T. Higgins as well, there was a lot of reports that said the reason the Bengals tagged him so early is because they're trying to work out not only a long-term deal, but if they can find trade partners out there, and almost accepting the fact that they can't keep him on their team past next season, and rather than losing him for nothing, they're going to have extra time to look for trade partners and get something back in return for him, because he believes he can be a number one receiver elsewhere. He believes he can get that type of money elsewhere, and more importantly, there are other teams that I'm very sure are willing to give him that type of money, like the Titans, the Cardinals. Just those two off the top of my head jump out as potential suitors for T. Higgins that could give him a lot of money to build their offenses, and for Brian Burns as well. He was tagged, but what's different about him, he's been, I think, a little bit more vocal about being disgruntled with the situation in Carolina. I don't think anybody needs reminding of the situation in Carolina. They get a new head coach. They're still trying to figure out Bryce Young and how he'll work. Offensively, they don't have that many weapons. Adam Thielen was there, but he kind of fizzled out towards the end of the year. And defensively, Brian Burns is probably their best player. And, just thinking about personal-wise, his career-wise, looking out for himself, like a lot of players should and probably have to do, he just might not be happy there, and he might not want to extend further with the Panthers. And he won't sign the franchise tag, and rather than losing him for nothing like these other guys as well, the Panthers might have to accept the fact that they're going to have to trade him because he is reported to be not entitled, but he'll be looking for up to or more than $27 million potentially. And I don't think the Panthers are in a spot right now to pay and allocate that much money to one position, Brian Burns, where they have so many other issues to worry about. And I think I've just seen it pop up a lot more. And, I'm wondering why that is. I kind of gave some reasons as to why that is, but I thought it was interesting and pretty fascinating to see how their teams are going to work it out because I expect all these players probably to get traded. But, I haven't really seen it too often before. And these players are very significant and are going to be great pieces on other teams. And I'm excited to see where they end up. But it is something different I noticed. And just on the other topic of another question I had, which running back or how long is it going to take for a running back to get signed? None of them were obviously franchise tagged. The Giants with Saquon, the Raiders with Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard and the Cowboys, Derrick Henry and the Titans. All these guys were let go essentially. And with an already down running back market, it doesn't look like they're going to get a lot of money. But just on that topic, which one is going to get signed or how long would it be? Are some of these running backs going to be a bit stubborn and try to negotiate more and extend the period before someone signs a running back? How many of them are going to get signed before the draft? Because it just seems like all these teams are resupplying through the draft, and rather than sign one of these guys for up to $9 million, they'll just get another running back and take their chances with him. Is that the smart thing to do? I don't think so. With the guys like Saquon, Tony Pollard, Derrick Henry, and even DeAndre Swift out there. But, that's where the league is going. They're allocating more money elsewhere, specifically to the quarterbacks, obviously, wide receivers, pass rushers are getting all the money, cornerbacks are getting all the money, and unfortunately for running backs, they're not. And it's going to be fascinating to see how they negotiate these deals. It was reported that Tony Pollard was willing to take less money to go back to the Cowboys. And is that smart for him? He plays a very physical position. Is it smart for him to take less money for all that he does and all the pain and physicality he goes through? If you look at a guy like Saquon, he looks more likely to be paid the most out of this class. But it looks like he's going to go to the Texans, and how long is it before they make a move, or the Eagles make the move, or the Cowboys? He's been rumored to a lot. Who's going to pull the plug first, and who's going to take the risk on one of these guys, who I think will instantly be a great addition to any team? I think DeAndre Swift as well. He's not really mentioned as much, but he had a good season with the Eagles, and he debunked a lot of these ideas that he wasn't really durable. He's had a lot of injury history with the Lions. Now, this season has been his most healthy season, and I think he's built a good resume, a good thing to put out there to other teams to say, hey, you saw last year, I put up great numbers. And frankly, I don't think the Eagles used him as much as they should have. And I think another team could definitely benefit from the skill talent that he has, not just running the ball, catching the ball. He's very dynamic when he gets the ball in his hands, and I think last year helped him a lot to get over those injury doubts, and he could be a great addition on another team as well. When and if they decide to sign him, when that would be, if I were to take a guess, I don't think any of these deals will be signed definitely not before the league year starts, and maybe not before late March, early April, I believe, just because, again, I think there's a lot of doubts around running backs, and I don't think teams right now are willing to jump on one of these guys right away to improve their team because they have other things to look for, and the market right now doesn't seem to support it. With the draft also having a lot of talent, I think this is a very deep draft, really all across the board, one of the deepest drafts I've seen in terms of talent at each position. The O-line, there's a great abundance of talents everywhere along the offensive line. Quarterback, I don't have to bring up. Wide receivers are really showing out as well. The defensive backs, I can name all the positions, and it seems like all of them are very deep, which is why all these teams are, kind of teetering right now. Is it worth putting all that money into a running back when I might have a Justin Jefferson or a Kirk Cousins to pay in free agency? A lot of teams are weighing their options right now, and I think they're going to do a lot of overthinking, and it might be a while before we see one of these running backs signed. Among one of the many questions that are still available after the franchise tag deadline. When will we get the answers? We're going to have to wait and see. But that's all the time I'm going to have for this episode. I want to thank all you guys again for listening or watching this episode. Even if you tuned in during the show or afterwards, if you rewatch it, please remember to follow and like the show. Like and follow the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok for more of this network's content. If you like this show and like more of this content and you want to see more of me, please check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the Podcast Network channel on YouTube for more of these live shows that I've recorded, as well as YouTube shorts that I put out, and the individual segments in individual videos if you happen to miss one or want to just tune in for one of the segments provided on the live shows. Tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time to more NFL and football conversations. As always, I've been your host, Manny Maradiegue. Take it easy, guys. I'll see you guys all tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.